The video I was planning to release today just doesn't feel appropriate anymore. In the light of this week's recent events, I'm going to try to do a bit more of an information-based video. Hey there everyone, and welcome to a little bit more internet nonsense. This week, I'm sure most of you have heard, there's been a lot of controversy about a channel called DaddyoFive. This video is not here to point fingers or to be accusatory. Instead, what I wanted to do was try to give a bit of information on what child abuse is, what constitutes it, and how it can affect the child in its developing years and after. The context I'm going to use for this video will be about the child's age, which was around 7 years old, but just know that different types of abuse affect children differently at all age ranges. So we all know that abuse is wrong, period. But sometimes our emotions can get the better of us. We may see something happening and think it's horrible and jump to conclusions, or maybe we don't think it's that bad and we try to defend the person doing it. What we need to understand is what types of actions actually constitute as child abuse. Child abuse is more than bruises and broken bones. While physical abuse might be the most visible, other types of abuse, such as emotional abuse and neglect, also leave deep, lasting scars. The earlier abused children get help, the greater chance they have to heal and break the cycle rather than perpetuate it. There are a few myths about child abuse that people seem to have misconceptions about, but here's the truth. Child abuse does not have to be only in the form of physical violence. It happens across all ranges, economic situations, and cultures. The majority of child abusers are actually family members or people close to the family, that it's only bad people or previous child abuse victims that are abusers, and that child abused children don't always grow up to be abusers themselves. Child abuse is never a straight black and white situation. There's always more to it than what a majority of people can see. But the important thing is to get the child out of that situation and into a safe and stable home for them to grow up healthy and happy. There's a lot of different signs of child abuse that people can see. Sometimes it's the obvious types, like cuts and bruises from physical abuse, but there's three main not-so-obvious signs that are a big tell for the child. They can learn to lack trust or have difficulties in relationships, meaning that forming lasting and healthy bonds could be next to impossible. They could hold feelings of being worthless, damaged, or useless, which could lead to instances of depression, anxiety, or other mental disorders. And lastly, they can have issues with regulating and handling their emotions, meaning that they can grow to have sudden and extreme anger outbursts, sadness, fear, or many other emotions. Any of these or a mix of these can lead to abuse of various substances when the child grows older in order to numb the sensation and the memories of what has happened to them. In terms of what constitutes as abuse, that can be a lot harder to define. There's two main types of clear-cut forms of abuse, physical and sexual. Everyone knows and understands what these are. Physical being the actual beating of a child, while sexual could range from inappropriate touching to grooming for sexual acts on the adult in charge or on others. Physical abuse is special in the way that it has three main elements that other forms of abuse do not: unpredictability, lashing out, and using fear as a controlling force. The child is constantly forced to be careful, never knowing what might get them in trouble next, and the parent can often feel that the fear is the only way to keep their child in check. The third form of abuse is neglect. This may be harder to see the signs of, but it can be pretty cut and dry as well for what constitutes as neglect. Things such as leaving small children at home alone, not providing them with adequate food, hygiene, or clothing, abusing alcohol or drugs so that you're incapable of taking care of the child, stuff like that. But lastly, and most overlooked, is the idea of emotional abuse. This form can be almost impossible to detect and can be even harder to prove in court. Emotional abuse can come in a wide variety of different things, and these are just a few of them. Constant belittling, shaming, and humiliating a child, calling names and making negative comparisons to others, telling a child they're no good, worthless, bad, or a mistake, frequent yelling, threatening, or bullying, ignoring or rejecting a child as punishment, limited physical contact with the child, exposing the child to the abuse of others. So these are the four kinds of abuse. But as I said before, different kinds of abuse can affect children differently at each stage of their life. Your brain goes through multiple developmental stages, and you're constantly learning how to handle different situations and more about yourself as you grow older. In terms of this case, the children have been said to be about 7 years old, so the age range I'm going to use as a point of reference is between 6 and 12 years. In this age range, children are just starting to get used to being in school. They're learning to be independent, trying out new activities, and finally learning what their strengths and weaknesses are in life. This is the age range where they're somewhat figuring out who they are and what they want to do. While being a good parent and still being there for your child is important, it is also important to let the child learn for themselves at this age. It can be a good idea for parents to allow children to learn of natural consequences for their actions and having to deal with them. At this age range, it is important for parents to try to teach their child a moral code and how to exercise self-discipline. I am not here to tell anyone how to raise their child. I do not, nor do I plan to ever have my own children, but there are certain things that are generally agreed upon to do and not to do. While every case is different, avoiding any of the abuses listed beforehand is imperative to your child growing up a full, happy, and healthy life, and not to have a potentially damaged developmental cycle. I have one other source that I used for research for this video, but I'm unable to put it in because of time, but I'll leave everything in the description for you to read at your own leisure. These 4 links cover the topics of a child's self-esteem, temperament, handling a difficult child, and dealing with disobedience. If you want, I'm sure you could also find various other sources that may fit your parenting style more than this one. Lastly, I wanted to leave off with a more scientific article on a thing called developmental trauma disorder, or DTD. This is a mental disorder that is along the lines of PTSD, but is specifically more geared towards children who have faced various types of abuse. I'm going to try to leave you with a few quotes to help you understand the gravity of the situation of child abuse and why the suspicion of it should never be taken lightly. Childhood trauma, including abuse and neglect, is probably our nation's single most important public health challenge. A challenge that has the potential to be largely resolved by the appropriate prevention and intervention. Each year, over 3 million children are reported to the authorities for abuse and/or neglect in the United States, of which about 1 million are substantiated. Many thousands undergo more traumatic medical and surgical procedures and are victims of accidents and of community violence. However, most trauma begins at home. The vast majority, 80% of people responsible for child maltreatment are the children's own parents. Inquiry into developmental milestones and family medical history is routine in medical and psychiatric examinations. In contrast, social taboos prevent obtaining information about childhood trauma, abuse, neglect, and other exposures to violence. Research has shown that traumatic childhood experiences are not only extremely common, they also have a profound impact on many different areas of functioning. For example, children exposed to alcoholic parents or domestic violence rarely have secure childhoods. Their symptomatology tends to be pervasive and multifaceted, and is likely to include depression, various medical illnesses, as well as a variety of impulsive and self-destructive behaviors. In the Adverse Childhood Experiences study by Kaiser Permanente and the Center for Disease Control, 17,337 adult HMO members responded to a questionnaire about adverse childhood experiences, including child abuse, neglect, and family dysfunction. 11% reported having been emotionally abused, 30.1% physical abuse, 19.9% sexual abuse, 23.5% exposure to family alcohol abuse, 18.8% to mental illness, 12.5% witnessed their mothers being battered, and 4.9% reported family drug abuse. This study also confirmed earlier suspected relationships between childhood abuse and multiple mental and physical conditions as an adult. Depression, suicide attempts, alcoholism, drug abuse, sexual promiscuity, domestic violence, cigarette smoking, obesity, physical inactivity, STDs, and a higher risk of heart disease, cancer, stroke, diabetes, skeletal fractures, and liver disease. This is only information from the first 2 pages of the paper. I would like to be able to give you more information, but this video has already gone on long enough. The most I can do is highly encourage that you please go and read up on this rather than make quick emotional responses. This is not an easy situation for anyone to handle, and it needs to be handled with care in order to protect the safety and best interests of the children at hand.